At first, it was very frightening. I'll never forget my first time on the air. I sat down on the set and forgot that I would need a mic. And that was the first time I thought, there is no doubt they can hear my heart beating through this microphone.
Stripping down. I don't daydream, I just do dreams. Built the fire, no camping. Imagine your next chapter for uncommon paths. It's the roadmap. With special guests you can learn from, more valuable than a treasure chest. Unlocking knowledge, catch fire, turn impossible to a playground. Difficulties we do them in like a pool table, got holes for them. Inspiration, catch fire, find your passion and live for it. Start bold, it gets harder, dig further. Inspiration, catch fire, find your passion and live for it.
Okay, well, welcome to Catch Fire Show. This week, we're here with Casey Nolen. This is the show where we're talking to passionate people that are taking untraditional and uncommon paths. So, Casey, thanks for being with us.
It's good to hear your voice. It's been too long, Simon.
It has been too long. I think the last time we talked, maybe you were doing some parquet floors. I don't know why I remember
that is so about parquet true. Floors. Yes, and it was terrible. I found out the hard way how bad I am at home improvement projects.
I talked to some of my friends and I'm just in awe. And then they're like, "Oh, it's just YouTube," and I'm like, maybe there's like a grit there that I don't have or something.
I know. My latest, I've got a muffler problem with my car, and when you watch the YouTube video, it looks easy to fix, but then when you get into it, it's like, what? This is why there are professionals. I just need to go to the mechanic.
Hasn't there been like a catalytic converter stealing thing going on? So I have a friend that's like, I'm getting my chains put on all my cars, and I'm like, there we go. So,
desperate times, I guess.
Well, you currently find yourself as a news anchor. Is that how you would describe your profession, or news reporter?
Yeah, it's Well, it's a little non-traditional, even in my title, I guess. I think like when my family watches from home, I'm a TV news anchor, but internally, I'm an anchor, part-time anchor. But I also do reporting a lot. That's the majority of my work. Most of that is political in nature these days. I'm covering a lot of politics. And then I also have this term, MSJ is in my, in the job description internally, which stands for multi-skilled journalist. It's just a made up way of saying you shoot your own video. So I shoot a lot of video as well.
Yeah, and that's something I've noticed about as we've known each other is that I mean, you do a lot of the technical stuff that people might assume somebody on screen doesn't need to know how to do.
It's just the nature of television. It's not a new idea. If you go to a small town and start out, you're going to have to do it all. It's just as the equipment has changed, the technology is just incredible. I mean, there are times when I shoot stories and some of the best stuff I have is from my iPhone. So the way that, and budgets, let's just be honest, with so many more media choices, it's just budgets aren't what they used to be. But the expectations are still there to cover the news. So more with less, but also without sounding too, like a Pollyanna company man, more opportunity too. It's certainly opened up doors for me that I would have never had if I didn't have the technical experience and wasn't willing to do both, or do more, or just to be open to different change, different opportunities. I guess it would not have been there otherwise for me.
Because I was going to say, I'm sure it works both ways. I mean, sometimes you wish you just maybe were in more of a team setting, but is there times where having to do so many different skill sets has kind of given you some creative challenges or some storytelling freedom?
Absolutely. And you hit it on the head there. There is no doubt that if I worked with another person, I think I'm better as a collaborator. I just think that, yes, I'm in the news business, but we are really just trying to be storytellers. And even if it's a pretty straightforward news item, you would tell it to your friend in a compelling way. You would kind of unfold the story, if you would. And it's without a doubt, no, everybody needs an editor. Everybody needs a second set of eyes. Everybody needs somebody to push them. And so you lose that when you're working by yourself to some degree. There is that kind of after action debrief with friends and colleagues, and you're looking around the industry at who's doing what, and you compare yourself and try to push yourself. But in the moment, you definitely miss that second set of eyes, and that other brain who is listening to an interview even and says, I can't tell you how many times the person running the camera has the best question of the interview because they've had the luxury of sitting back and listening and without the pressure of trying to sound smart, I suppose. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, I think, again, back to the changing technology, I think just the size of the gear allows for more intimate interaction a lot of time. I had the good fortune of, we have a fair number of stations in the company that we support when different things are, big stories are happening. So earlier in the year, in a time that seems like a decade ago, pre-pandemic, I went to Iowa to help our sister station cover the caucuses there. And there's something to be said for a network crew with a sound man and a cameraman and a reporter and a producer. But especially when you look at the richness of their video sometimes and just what they're able to do. But there's also something to be said for just, standing around in a line and chit-chatting with somebody, and you just kind of have a little, almost in the palm of your hand, camcorder, and you can just kind of talk one-on-one, and they don't feel like they're performing, I hope, as much. At least that's my impression.
Yeah.
It does not. Now there is some credibility with the big equipment. They assume you're with a reputable organization, so you do kind of have to tell them who you are and what you're doing, so they don't think the wedding photographer got loose and is pestering people. But I do think you have the opportunity to be more intimate.
I shot weddings for a time, and that kind of brought back like a nervous twitch a little bit.
No, it's thankless. I don't know how people do it. It's too much.
I don't know, the mother of the bride was always like the challenger in that situation. Like they just wanted not just one more, but like some of the stuff they asked me to do, I was just like, I kind of had to say it back, like, you want me to do what? you know, and you're just like, no. So I don't know if this is going too far back in time, but you were able to go to the Olympics last time around, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is the number one example of something I would have never been able to do had it not been for the fact that they could, again, let's just be honest, budgets, they can send one person for the product of two, hopefully for the cost of one. It's by far the best assignment I've ever had, and I'm just thinking about how at each other's throats it seems like the whole world is sometimes these days. The Olympic Village is just a beautiful place of people speaking different languages and just excited to see it. And I got to tell you, however out of fashion it might seem sometimes, from what you see on TV and different things, when people see that American flag, or if they can spot us by how we dress and how we talk loud, things. 99% of the people are excited to see you, and you might be the first American they've ever met, and things like that. Like, it's a beautiful place where people are getting along, and not to mention the athletes who are, especially the people whose names you will never know. The dedication is just on another level that I don't think I'll ever understand. So I had the good fortune of going to London, Sochi, and Rio. So I've been spoiled, and it's especially Rio. That was spectacular, down there on the beach and just seeing those other cultures. Sochi was a little different. We didn't have as much cultural interaction because it was kind of in a bubble, like Disneyland of sorts. But London was fantastic. I had never been to London at that time. And again, just the international, all the colors bleeding into one, as as U2 says from the Bible, if I'm not mistaken. But nevertheless, it was just the whole world seemed to get along, and it was amazing.
Wow. And so I mean, when you guys tell some of these stories from the Olympics, I mean, you probably need to find a little bit of like messiness, because as to interface with us normal people that aren't, as like exercising all the time. But what are some of the attributes that you notice in some of these athletes that perform at such a high level?
Yeah, that's a great question. In no particular order, just off the top of my head, one is just a dedication to a cause that has nothing to do with recognition, even though they are trying to compete for that highest honor. I mean, these are folks who are just so dedicated to the craft of what they do. And I think in some instances with the younger athletes, maybe somebody made that decision for them, perhaps, but they still have developed a mental capacity for focus, and not even just in the moment, not even just on the balance beam or whatever it might be, but for years in what they eat and how they spend their time. Michael Phelps comes to mind. I had the good fortune of just sitting down and at the time I was really running more camera than I was speaking. I've interviewed him once, but the other time I was just really doing more camera work, but just laser focused, and maybe to a fault. That's a question that I don't know the answer to about what the cost of being so good is at any one thing, but focus is what really comes to mind. Okay. It's incredible, and I really like the ones like the jujitsu or the maybe more than focus, I should say, what they have overcome. As you get older, you realize we're an adaptable species. We can adapt and do things that we would never think we'd be able to do had we not just had to do it. And a lot of them have stories that they've had to overcome, whether it be physical or financial or just, you can only imagine the temptations of just some normalcy to lose the focus that it takes. So I think that's what stands out to me, especially, like I say, the ones that not the Michael Phelps, and Michael Phelps wasn't Michael Phelps the first time he was doing it. He was just a kid, so, but incredible people.
Yeah.
Incredible people who, they always, when you hear those podium speeches, they thank all the people around them. I think that's something that's important for me to remember too, is they don't do it as individuals. They really do have a team. It's really a community of people that's pulling for them, whether it's just their parents or, maybe their coaches and sponsors, who knows, but like they're not doing it alone. They really do have a team around them.
Mm-hmm. Plug for Visa. I'm just joking. They're not a sponsor for the podcast. But so, I mean, you see people on TV, and I got to be around a newsroom a little bit in college, just like interning and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the cameras turn on and you're focused on really specific pieces of the set, and everybody's, on and polished and stuff like that. Do you find yourself, does it feel kind of like you're going between worlds when the music starts and stuff like that?
This is therapy or just professional answers only? That's a tough one. Without a doubt, there is a big part of my job that is performance based. There's some theatrics to it for sure, and I'm careful when I say that, because the only thing we have to trade in is our own credibility and accuracy, so I don't mean to imply that we are drumming up drama for the sake of drama or trying to pit people against each other. I really am proud of the group that I work with, and
absolutely
take a very cautious approach to things. But you do have to present things in a compelling way, and as an appropriately, accurately compelling way. So I don't know if this is what you're asking, but what comes to mind is how genuine is that performance? And for me, at first it was very frightening. I started behind the scenes, as we talked about. That was my career for 8 years. And I had some like theater experience a little tiny bit in college. And so I wasn't like completely averse to, an audience per se. But when I'll never forget my first time on the air at Channel 5. I sat down on the set, and this was before we had all wireless equipment that they would hook you up beforehand, or you hook yourself up beforehand. This was just, you had to go out there and make sure you pick up your wired lavalier microphone. And I just forgot. I just forgot that I would need a mic. So someone graciously, one of the longtime anchors, tapped me on the shoulder right before I was about to go on, pointed to the mic, and I put the mic on. And that was the first time I thought, oh, there is no doubt they can hear my heart beating through this microphone. Like, it is that nerve-wracking. So turns out you can't, but I was convinced that I thought people might see my shirt moving. That was how I just had never experienced such a rush of just nerves. And I don't know who told me this first or where I got this, but especially then, I really just decided to focus on one person at a time. At the time, my aunt, I guess great aunt technically, was still living in O'Fallon, Missouri. And I just thought about Aunt Betty and what, I knew she'd love me no matter what I did. And to me, I was just presenting for her. I wasn't thinking about the numbers. And that really kind of became a habit for me. So I don't have to like intentionally think about that, but that is how I'm. So it's a fine balance between talking to one person, which, by the way, most people are watching TV by themselves. So you really are just talking to one person. So finding that balance between talking to one person, but doing it with an energy that I still struggle to master, because there are times when I watch things back and I'm thinking, boy, I really nailed it. And somebody will be like, yeah, you were kind of sleepy tonight. You kind of need to give it a little bit. And I'm like, what? That was my best ever. And I watch back the tape, and yeah, they're right. I was a little sleepy looking. It's just amazing what two dimensions can knock down, when you go on camera. And so finding that personal and genuine, earnest, just really speaking from the heart, even though you've already scripted what you're going to say. And then also finding the energy to break through that two-dimensional plane of the TV and not put people to sleep, and not lose your credibility for not having enough energy.
Yeah, and I've even just at work and at some conferences working on public speaking myself, and just having a hard time not talking as fast as my heart is beating. That's like, yes. That's one of my biggest respects for Broadway and off-Broadway performers, is that they don't rush, even though their heart must be pumping way faster than the music sometimes. Totally. It's like that control.
Letting myself breathe. There's probably a metaphor in there that I'm not mature enough to completely unpack, but when you need to breathe. If it's in the middle of a sentence and it's not the right time, just breathe. For the longest time, my biggest fear was I couldn't get my breath out. I guess it was a little bit of hyperventilating maybe. And so I would get so much air in me that I would talk until the, roll tape. And then it was like, so now it's just like, honestly, a lot of times before I go on, I get all the air out. I don't take a deep breath in. I get a deep breath out. And then I just know when I need to take a breath, I take a breath. And that just kind of calms me as well, and helps me be a more natural speaker, hopefully.
It might, quote, read from just hearing your story, somebody that doesn't know you as well, that you kind of at some point then arrived. You talked about, going on set first at Channel 5, and okay, you got your break. As far as like what I know about you, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seemed at that point you added another part to your skill set. Like
Definitely.
You still continue to do all these other things. And so do you have any thoughts, like from the perspective of how your craft has evolved and how you've continued to work on your craft? Does it seem like you are still learning, growing, or does it seem like it's kind of like, okay, now you're there and you can just kind of coast?
I'll never forget when I was working as a photographer, I went to this little mini weekend conference that was mostly for visual photography, video. We call them photographers in the TV business, even though it's video, but it was mostly for video. But they had a just the best storyteller reporter in the business speaking. His name is Boyd Hoopert, and you've probably seen a story of his or two gone viral, and you just didn't know whose it was. But he just has an incredible storytelling gift. And I'll never forget that he said, somebody asked him, like, and he's been doing it for quite a while. He's probably could retire in the next few years. And they asked him just like, what motivates you? How do you just keep going? And you're just constantly learning, getting better. And he said, well, it's you, people coming up behind me. I'm afraid you're going to be, I don't, this isn't a quote, but essentially better than me. I'm afraid you're going to outdo me. I'm afraid you're going to, he didn't say take my job, but, replace me. I want to be relevant. And I remember at the time thinking, boy, that sounds exhausting. I don't want to be like that. And here I am. That's exactly how I am. And it's not exhausting, actually. It gives me energy. It's turned out to be a positive thing. I understand more of what he was saying, I think. We've had some folks here that have just hit the ground running right out of college at a level that took me years to get to. And so that, to me, again, going back to working solo, but needing that team, needing that feedback, needing people to push you, needing people to encourage you. That, I think, and as I've, honestly, I struggle sometimes because I think maybe I am kind of maxed out on this particular, like for instance, the shooting, the photography. Or, I'm like, I kind of think I'm just kind of maxed out. I don't know that I can get any, I don't. So that's when you have to find either just something to watch or someone to talk to that you appreciate their craft. And then you kind of get reinvigorated. And next thing you know, or for me anyway, I'm trying harder on what might be an otherwise kind of run in the middle day where I could kind of phone it in if I'm honest, but you want to try a few new things. Sometimes it's technology related, you see somebody, they put a GoPro timer on a GoPro time lapse on an egg timer. So it pans and it is doing time lapse. So when they play it back, it's this nice even pan with racing clouds. And you're like, how can I work that into a story? And that's all you can think about. So it's very much always trying to add to the toolkit. When I talk to younger folks and they will see a story that somebody's done and they're like, I'll never get there. And like, well, not all at once. No, you won't. You have to just focus on one thing at a time. So I try to remember that. I think conversations like this are important. I think I'll be more positive, even just from just talking these things out with you instead of, the temptation of complaining about what's not right or what we don't have or what resources we don't have or what's wrong with the nature of the business. That's an easy conversation. I'm guessing in just about any industry to slip into. And some of that's necessary. I heard someone say once they had a 2/3 rule with their photographer when they were driving to a story, that they would take out a piece of paper that they had written 2/3 on and put it on the dashboard. And they were like, okay, 1/3 of this car ride, we can talk about all the things that are wrong, but 2/3, we need to talk about what we're going to do when we get there. And I've always thought that was nice.
That's wise.
So there's lots. I feel like there's a ton to learn.
That's awesome.
I would say what's to learn right now is what we're doing right now. I mean, Abby Larico at Channel 5 has jumped right into the podcast world, and she's already picked up an Edward R. Murrow Award and the Missouri Broadcasters Award, and just like an actual following. And she's doing a fantastic. Abby Eats St. Louis is a fantastic. She's really just telling stories about St. Louis through food versus doing a food podcast.
Yeah.
But that's where I think the challenge is right now. Watching election coverage, a lot of the videos I'm seeing on Twitter are actually from reporters are actually repurposed from their TikTok account. I don't do that. That seems, foreign to me. So as different mediums change, I think that's so while maybe I did max out on my photography skills, I think where I should probably be looking is where is the audience, and go there and figure out the medium the audience is already using.
I'm not trying to sound wise. I just, I can send you all of my TikTok learning examples.
Please.
But what I figured out finally is that the way that the TikTok stuff is set up, it's like linear editing used to be. It's like in and out point and then do it. And so that's what broke my brain at first is like, I was thinking about it like non-linear editing.
Right.
I probably need to define those terms, but anyway, I don't
No,
want to go
I
too
get exactly
technical,
what you're
but
saying. And isn't it fascinating that what was a course when I was in college is
Yeah.
now intuitive to someone who downloads an app? That blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I want to go a few more different directions. First is 30 Rock, the show became really popular. About the same time, there was another one, I think it was CBS, called Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. Probably don't watch it because it's just about some love triangles overall. But one thing that struck me is it's kind of about that other side of SNL, Saturday Night Live, a little more serious. And the thing that just got me every time is in the producer's office, there's a countdown clock. And starts, every time the show ends,
Yeah.
it starts at 6 days, 11 hours, 59 minutes, or 23 hours.
Right.
And it got me every time because at that time I was working in the live industry too. And I just know that feeling of like you finish one and your brain just goes to the next one and you like can't even enjoy it. And talk about that is that
it's a blessing and a curse. When you have a bad day, move on. No, there's tomorrow. When you have a great day, you got to move on. You got to do it again tomorrow. I can remember just thinking, as a kid, learning about different careers and different things. I can remember being a little, who could work on a deadline like a reporter? It just was kind of overwhelming to even think about. And now I don't know. I can't get my laundry done if the clock's not ticking. Like maybe to a fault. It bled over into all areas of my life, or maybe that's just the way I work and I never knew it. So that is good and bad. When I have had the chance to do some more long form stuff, again, pre-pandemic, I got the chance to go down to Haiti earlier this year in January for a story. There are a ton of St. Louisans with connections and doing some real good stuff in Haiti, and long term too, not just like bouncing down for the photographs and the Instagram pics and say they did a mission trip, but like people who've been there for decades. It's impressive. And so I was actually there to update a story I'd started 10 years prior when that massive earthquake had hit back in 2010. So we went down there, and then so all of a sudden it's like you get back, and I've just shot a ton of video. And I'm accustomed to maybe knocking out a story in about 13 minutes of footage, or 30. If I shoot more than 30 minutes of tape for a 90-second story, I'm wasting everybody's time, So now I've got hours and hours of tape, so it's good that I can work on a deadline. It's also, I found myself struggling with a bigger project like that to really get my arms around it. So it kind of cuts both ways, but that turned out okay. I think I was able to kind of, what's the phrase? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, So I kind of chunked it off, and we did some for the air. And this is where the technology in the world we live in is good. And then I had little vignettes that were good stories in and of themselves, and were not going to fit in that a lot of, I had to beg, borrow, and steal to get 3 minutes and 30 seconds on the air. Whereas in that, so I put it online, put it on YouTube, put it on the website, put it different places, and people could share it, the people that were close to it, and they can, get the word out about different things going on there. But the deadline can be very helpful for me, but it's also something that I lean on too much, maybe.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's okay. I never thought about it both ways. I just I think growing up, I did a lot of live stuff. And then I think I just reached this point where I was like, oh, there's things that aren't live. Let me try some of those things for a minute. And I think
Did you have to find a new way of working? Did you have to find a new way of time management, for instance? Like, that's what I find is difficult.
Oh, I think so. But I think the reason that I switched so non-reluctantly, so passionately, was because I found myself being able to work towards these big kind of ideals that I had. Like, oh, we're going to make this website, for example, really, really great. And it's like, I have a deadline that is in, 90 days, or I'm throwing out a number. And for me, that was just as like motivating as, a live event, and I felt like I could put some more polish on it. So
I would struggle with 90 days. Give me 90 seconds and I'll figure out something to say. 90 days is tough. We did we did a couple of more documentary type things, and that's where, again, back to the team. I've found a couple of people that I connect well with. That they are very organized. They are they are good at making intermediate deadlines, and that's key for me to take on a project of that size.
Oh yeah, and time management and all that stuff. I mean, that's a lifelong. I
Yeah.
still find myself like, and then I had a toddler, and then I'm like, oh, where now? Where's all this time that I, okay, switching gears a little bit more, because I think this is an important part. Just knowing you a little bit too is, so you're a consummate professional. You talked about credibility. I view you as, as a viewer of having extreme credibility with
Thank
your
you.
audience.
That means a lot. Thank you.
You all are telling, the stories that need to be told, and obviously have the economic pressures, the political pressures. I mean, there's so much just going on in the industry, but knowing you as well, I feel like you're a part of the community, and that you feel some kind of responsibility to care for the place that you live. And can you talk about how that all intersects a little bit in your world?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, in this business, you as others, it's a little more transient than other professions, though, because if, let's say, you're not that this is on the not that being a reporter is on the same level as being a lawyer or a doctor or something, or a teacher, but there are a lot of those kinds of jobs. Even if you want to aspire to be the superintendent, there are at least a few dozen of those jobs in our area. There are only so few. There are only so many positions available to be a reporter in a given town. So the business definitely people move around a lot, and people and quote unquote move up. I think about that a lot. There's some, amazing stations where there are more resources, because just by the nature of the local economy being a boomtown economy more than where we live. But I always feel I don't want to oversell this, because I really appreciate what you just said, and because I do want to. This is where I live. I live in the city of St. Louis, and I take a lot of pride in that. And I believe in the town. I do believe that there's some good things happening here, and a lot of things that we need to spend more time highlighting. But when I do think about, well, there's a quote unquote bigger market, could I take a shot at that job? I don't know. There's just something about leaving that feels like giving up on the town a little bit, or just kind of yeah. Well, nobody's confused me for him in this profession, but yeah, I mean, the easy way out, the easy track, the bailing on the commitment, I guess. Kind of like the relationship is hard, because, man, I get mad at St. Louis too. Don't get me wrong. It can drive you crazy. And so it's kind of like almost like a marriage. Like, is this a broken relationship that I need to move on, or is this one that we can all pull together and save, and it'll be stronger on the other side for having gone through the hard stuff that this town has to deal with? And I think, and sticking maybe with the relationship analogy, other towns have their problems too. There's no perfect job. There is no perfect city, but yeah, it's a challenge to try to, I guess, advocate for covering certain topics that might not at face value present themselves as typical daily news. I mean, we also serve a purpose of people want to turn on or click and find what's going on right now. If they want more in-depth stuff, they might go elsewhere. So there's a challenge there of saying, how do we fulfill our first responsibility, and then where can we find some time or some space to delve a little bit more? I'm thinking like how do you take on race in a town that needs to talk about race in just a typical newscast? So I think that comes down to who's in your story, and not that you're trying to check a box when you decide who you interview, but are you interviewing people that represent the community or represent the people affected by any given story that you're covering? or am I just staying in my box? Am I just staying in my bubble and going to the same old people that I know and I'm comfortable with and I'm familiar with? Or am I getting outside of that comfort zone and trying to find a Black man or a Black woman who might have a different perspective on something that I never would have thought of and never would. So those are the little things, I guess, there that, and I'm glad to say that there are other people in the building, well, in the organization, since most of us aren't in the building right now with the pandemic, but there are other people thinking those same things and pushing me and challenging me too. So that's good. I don't know. I hope that made sense. I feel like I kind of went down two different routes there, but.
So you talked a little bit about, I would summarize it as format a minute ago. Like you mentioned TikTok. I think the podcast was kind of directly related to some of the examples that you gave. And that was kind of related to sometimes you do a little bit of the one-man band stuff when you're doing all aspects of a story. Talk about this kind of, this is the way I think about it, is that the news media has this role that they've traditionally played. And I don't know about you, but like my wife was a journalism major in college. And then so this things like Vice come up and it's just like, it's almost antagonistic. Like they're not doing what we're doing or something like that. How do you think about format versus role and kind of balance those tensions?
That's really an interesting example. Vice, when in 2014 we were all struggling with the issues coming out of Ferguson, I had already kind of actually taken a liking to Vice at the time. And then I saw their coverage of Ferguson and it really made me mad. I was like, that's not nuanced enough. That's not really, you're missing the point. That's not us. That's not what we're talking about. That's not. And then I watched it a few months later and I was like, oh yeah, they got it pretty right. They actually did a pretty good job. I just think the format was a little sexier than I was accustomed to. And maybe I was struggling at the time. Of course, that was just an emotional time to begin with. And it was just too close to it to watch anybody's reporting probably. So Vice is an interesting example that, in journalism school, they'll tell you, I say this having never been to journalism school myself, but the idea, the big J journalism says the reporter is not the story. Vice, the reporter is very much almost in every single frame of the video. And I think what's different about that kind of style is it's a little bit more of experiential, like come with me, let me show you what I'm seeing. And it takes the right kind of person to do that. It also takes a crew. That's really hard to do as a one man band, one woman band. But I'm actually okay with that kind of evolving style. I think, it's a little bit like if Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace, we're doing your local news, it's kind of that, you're going to experience it as I experience it. But that also takes time and that takes resources and those are two things that are hard. The local news, you got to get it done, and the resources being the crew. It's hard to get that second camera or to get that walking shot with you and the person in the story. So, but as far as that style and the different things, like will the reporter being on TikTok or the reporter doing Snapchat stories, I'm okay with all that. I think if as long as you can be true and genuinely presented, you got to evolve. I think, I'll show one of my favorite stories to my own family, and my mother will be like, "That's a nice tie. That was a good tie." I'm like, that is not the point. The tie was not the point. So you've got to figure out a way to tell a story in its most compelling way if you're going to break through and help inform the public so they can make good decisions as a community. You can't, the old way just doesn't cut it,
Especially if somebody's wearing a tie, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Well, so I mean, you, again, one of the things I just can't tell our listeners enough is I think of you as a very good learner. You're very good at learning things. And
Wow, that's really nice of you. I think that's the highest compliment. I take that as just like the best thing a person could say about me. Thank you.
Oh yeah. And I just wondered, people that are listening to this that are aspiring, they're trying to find their contribution. They're trying to find, where they're going to kind of stick or what spaghetti metaphorically might stick to the wall.
Hmm.
What advice do you have for them as far as like posture or how to incorporate that kind of learning mentality even in their craft?
Well, maybe I'll just briefly tell you how I made this switch from behind the scenes to behind the scenes and in front of the camera. I, first, kind of like I said earlier, I had kind of a, it's in my nature to perform a little bit and to have that role. So I decided that I was going to give it a shot. I really wanted to, I felt like I think I had the opportunity when I was a full-time photographer behind the scenes to do some writing on a year-end special. And I just my brain just kind of came alive. So there was me throwing some spaghetti at the wall, and I needed to pay attention to that. I just enjoyed that writing. And I think in my head, I wasn't a writer. I don't know why, but I was like, I can't write. That's not my thing. Somebody liked it. Somebody told me it was good. It was hard to believe when they told me it was good. But then it stuck with me. So I think you got to have to be open to, for me personally, like there aren't a lot of thunderclaps and visions and dreams. It's what other people say to me. And they have to sometimes say it over and over. A little old lady, when I was interviewing her as a camera person behind the scenes, but I had to go out by myself just to grab a soundbite with this person. And she said, you just have a nice, way about you or something. She's like, you should be a reporter. I'm like, here's this lady. And I was living in Alabama at the time, middle of nowhere. Like, why is she telling me this? So those kind of things came along, and I ignored them. I was scared of them, and I ran from them a lot of times, just in my own head. So I think, for me personally, if it's scary, now not everything, running into traffic is scary, and I don't recommend doing that. But there are things that I kind of knew I should try, but that I was scared to try. In fact, I'll have to play this back at some point because I feel like that is coming around the corner in who knows what capacity, and I'll be just as scared and think of reasons not to do it. That's just me. Some people just jump. But for me, it was listening to some of those things. And then, again, I happened to there was a guy who was like he was a pastor at this church I had been going to, but then that really didn't work for him. And he was trying a new career, and he was going to be a life coach. And I never even heard of a life coach. I didn't know what that was, but he was like, come see me. It's free. I need the practice. I need the hours to get my training or whatever. And I was like, okay. So he's like, what do you, so he's going to help me make this transition. And something I'll never forget, I really should reach out to him to get the language down right, but he drew it on a chalkboard for me, or a dry erase board, I think it probably was. It just kind of like building blocks, like blocks you would stack as a kid, And he made the analogy that, like, okay, so if you want to, so your blocks are here in the center of the picture, something over to the right and up, that's where you want to be. But you can't get to that block without other blocks to stack it on. So if you need to go over and up, you're going to have to start building those new foundations to get up there. And some of these blocks will help in that. Some of these blocks will overlap. So that's kind of a simplistic analogy, but it really clicked with me about, okay, it's not just a matter of courage. There are some practicalities here. I need to do X, Y, and Z. And then he really broke it down for me. Going back to the deadline conversation, at the time he said, well, this particular conversation, how are you going to make a resume reel to convince a person to hire you as an on-camera person? I said, well, I can just need to, put a few stories together. And he's like, well, how are you going to do that? And I was like, well, I guess I could take the story that I shot for another reporter and rework it myself. He's like, okay, what do you need to do that? And I was like, well, I guess I need the raw tape. He's like, great. Where is that raw tape? I was like, well, they sit on the shelf for about a week and then we recycle them. He's like, how soon can you get one of those? He broke it. He's like, would you like to call me or do you want me to call you when you've got that raw tape in your hand? Like, that's how granular he broke it down for me. And it worked. So I had the big dream. then I had kind of a practical conversation with myself about how to get there, and then a real detailed thing that this individual helped me walk through. And then, and like I said, I was scared to death. Even after all those steps, we got that reel together. Long story, but then some things just fell into place. Opportunities opened up, and lo and behold, I was ready with the resume reel in my hand. When I just decided to do this at the time, it would have never worked out. But I've been working on this for some time. It's not quite the 10,000 hours theory, but I had been working on this. The other thing I've been introduced to is that idea of 1% gains, where 1% better every day. It doesn't look like much for a really long time, and then all of a sudden, those gains really take off, and that curve of improvement really takes off. So for a long time, I've been doing this really boring work of putting together this resume by saving the raw footage, reworking the scripts, editing them. I mean, it would take me 3 days to do one story. I now can, do that in 15 minutes if I have to, whatever it is. So that it was a combination of being around someone who could help me focus, listening to outside things that were kind of coming my way, ideas that were kind of making me come alive a little bit, and then figuring out how to push through the fear of fear of failure or fear of success. I'm not sure which, but, pushing through that. And again, I'm far from an Olympian, but like the Olympian, having people around you. I had someone personally who was encouraging me, and then someone professionally who was helping me set goals. And that's how I made that most significant to date career switch for me.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really helpful. Just to hear the vulnerability. And I know so many people, you can polish it all you want to, or, talk a good game, a strong game, but, all of us face that kind of stuff. And it's just great to hear the real story behind it. Just in closing, are you reading anything or listening to anything recently that you want to share about? Is anything?
Well, this is how bad I read, like every inch of the newspaper, I feel like, and in multiple ones and everything, but I'm embarrassed to admit this. I'm a really bad book reader. So I've restarted what I had started. I've restarted Atomic Habits. Are you familiar with this book? So that's actually where the 1% gain thing, I'd seen that before, like a person had grabbed that from their running training and put it into a slide presentation once I was doing some training, and I liked that. But then just see it again, he talks about ice melting, and ice melts at 32.1 degree, I suppose, 33 degrees. Well, from 0 degrees all the way up to 33 degrees, there's work being done to melt that ice cube as the temperature rises. You just don't see it. And all of a sudden you cross that mark, and then the ice cube just starts to melt. And so that's something I've been thinking a lot about, is what work am I doing now? What should I be working on now that the rewards won't be immediate? I won't see the gains immediately, but hopefully down the road I will.
Stripping down.